Welcome, everyone. We're here at Battletoad. We're going to be going over ETL in the cloud. I'm Nathan Wilkerson, the VP of Engineering at Battletoad. We're also joined with David Dolan, an engineering team lead, and Gitika Vij, who is a partner solutions architect analytics with AWS. So today we're going to go over ETL for machine learning, touch on glue and step functions, review a case study we had, and then go over some proof of concept funding options you can have while working with Amazon. A little bit about Battletoad. We are a advanced consulting partner with AWS. We've worked on some recognizable clients like ABC, Recording Academy, and Wheel of Fortune. If you enjoy this webinar, we have a couple more upcoming ones. On February 27th, we'll be doing Bedrock for natural language processing. And on March 12th, training models with SageMaker. So ETL for machine learning on AWS. The problem, you've moved a lot of data to the cloud. The data's probably come from multiple sources. It's probably unclean. You're missing data on certain fields. And you have to make the data match to what your database is expecting. So what do? The solution is to perform ETL on the data, where you're extracting the data, you're transforming it, and then you're loading it into the designated database. But ETL's challenges, particularly at scale, cost, scalability, security, reliability, performance, these are all things you have to take into consideration as you build up your data pipeline. The good news is that Amazon has solutions for these in the cloud. And with that, I will hand it over to Gitika, who's going to go over some of those tools.
Thank you, Nathan. Let me quickly share my screen. Just let me know once you can see it.
You're good.
Okay, so as Nathan already mentioned that we do have some ETL tools that you can definitely use. So let's start off by talking about Glue. So if you're not aware of, have not worked with the service, Glue is an AWS data integration service that is fully managed and serverless and allows all the users to easily discover, prepare, move, and integrate data from multiple sources. So it offers data integration for every user that you can think of, with visual IDEs for authoring jobs and preparing data sets. You have notebook style interfaces, and you have powerful AI and ML transformations as well within the Glue environment, as well as you have orchestration mechanisms such as workflows that you can use to orchestrate your data pipelines. So this also allows you to have a ton of flexibility to have all of the workloads in one place. It is very scalable and cost effective with pay as you go billing, which allows you to increase agility as well as optimize your overall cost for data pipelines. And our estimation shows that Glue is almost 7 times cheaper compared to on-premise ETL tools and around 55% cheaper compared to other cloud tools which are out there. And of course, once you have performed all of your transformation successfully, you can easily utilize all of this data for your ML specific use cases. And at AWS, of course, we keep innovating whenever we are working with services such as AWS Glue. For Glue, however, we have defined 4 pillars of innovations, which we ultimately end up focusing on. Starting off with connect and ingest data, which is the first step of data integration and basically goes around on how you can discover your data assets. And over here, we want you to be able to connect to more and more data sources every time, regardless of wherever it resides. And for that, we have built several native connectors and increased ecosystem of partners providing domain-specific data connectors. And still in this pillar, once you access your data sources, we want to give you a set of transformations for data preparations as well as for management. For this, we provide you with a rich set of pre-built as well as custom transformations. The second pillar, as you see here, is centralized and unified data governance. Because once you have discovered all of your data, you want to be able to connect and move your data into your data lakes, as well as your data warehouses and your databases. And also, you need to be able to centrally catalog it and make it available across all of your organizations. So, for example, um, one org might need data from marketing, one might need from finance, and so on and so forth. So, you want all of this governance to be really, really easy. And after you have cataloged the data, you also want to secure and share data with all the users. And you also want to make sure that they have fine grained access. Like you do not want to be able to share all of the data with everyone. And the integration with AWS Lake integration, just Lake Formation does just that. Then we have user productivity and data ops. And if you think about it these days, the decision making power each day is getting closer to individual users. And each user differs vastly in their own technical capabilities. And so you want to be able to provide persona specific user journeys and specific tools for each type of user which is out there. And we also wanted to provide additional productivity and data ops tooling for the users being able to author their jobs, being able to run the jobs, as well as implement business workflows. And the last pillar is the scalable data integration engine. And that's where we provide a fast, open, and highly scalable serverless execution engine. And we also additionally provide capabilities such as monitoring capabilities that caters to a variety of workloads such as batching, streaming, or even micro batching if that is the use case. And over here, what we have is the whole Glue ecosystem that you need to be aware of if you are ever going to be working with it. So we start off with Glue connectors and Glue crawlers. And as I mentioned, even in the previous slide, we want to be able to give all of the users and all of our customers the ability to connect to all of the data sources as well as variety of data sources which are out there. And we want to be able to automatically extract metadata to create external tables in our catalog, which in turn acts as a central repository to catalog our metadata and integrate with other AWS analytics services, as we see over here. There's also a Glue Schema Registry, which enforces schemas and schema evolution, especially for streaming data, which helps us in preventing downstream failures caused by any kind of schema changes. Then we have Glue Data Catalog and Glue ETL jobs, where customers can discover the data, clean it, transform it, aggregate it, and all the data from different stores, which could be from your on-premise data store as well. And while doing all of that, Glue can actually generate the ETL scripts automatically for you. This also allows non-developers to build ETL pipelines without having to put too much effort or without having to learn a ton of services or new tools. And expanding further in the transformation topic, I want to highlight 3 different ways customers have in order to develop their Glue jobs. Starting with ETL developers or, say, data engineers, they can use visual tools to build their jobs, such as using AWS Glue Studio. And if you haven't worked with it, again, this is very easy to work with. It's just a drag and drop, and it's really intuitive and easy to work with. But say if you have data engineers or data scientists who prefer coding, which sometimes is much more efficient than visual development, they can run their code on notebooks or even interactive sessions. And if you have data analysts or business analysts that want to transform and prepare the data, they can use Data Brew, which is again a no code visual experience to perform transformation of the data. Now that we have taken a look at AWS Glue, of course, it's great, but you can also use other services to decouple your pipelines as well as perform transformations. So as you see over here in the screen, You may use multiple Lambda functions in your pipeline to perform transformations and have all of them as part of a workflow with the use of a service such as step function, which I'll touch upon in the next slide. And you can also have something called as event-driven architectures with services like Amazon Event Bridge. Now let's see how step functions can help you with your pipelines as well as implementing these loosely decoupled pipelines in your own environment. So step function actually allows you to build visual workflows that allow you to enable fast translation of business requirements into technical requirements. So you can build applications in a matter of minutes. And when you need change, you can swap or reorganize the components without customizing any kind of code. Then you have step function. It also allows you to have to write less code overall because it will be able to manage the logic of your application for you and even implement basic primitives such as branching, parallel executions, and even timeout. This removes extra code that may be repeated in your microservices and functions. It can also manage state, checkpoints, and restarts for you to make sure that your application executes in order in the order that you actually expect it to. You can have built-in try and catch, you can have retries and rollback capabilities, which can also help in dealing with errors and exceptions automatically. And this is how it really looks like. Well, Workflow Studio for AWS Step Function is what you will use when you're interacting with step functions. It is a visual workflow designer that lets you create serverless workflows by connecting AWS services together. You have a simple drag and drop interface or built-in code editor. You can visually create and edit these workflows. You can actually control how the data flows between steps, transforming the inputs and outputs as and when it's needed. You're also able to configure error handling for each of the steps which are part of the workflow. And as you build your workflow by dragging states onto the canvas, Workflow Studio validates your real-time drag and drop that's happening and generates the necessary code automatically in the background. And if you want, you can also review this code or make additional tweaks right within that editor. And when you're done designing your workflow, you can save it, you can run test executions, and you can examine the results in Step Function console. Overall, Workflow Studio gives you a low-code way to visually add and change the workflows that orchestrate multiple serverless services for all of your applications. And now that we have taken a look at the services that can help you in performing transformation for your ML use cases, I will hand it over to David to talk a little bit more about some case studies.
Excellent. One moment. I guess let me grab screen.
Yeah.
And hopefully we're looking at a screen that says case studies for NMA. Okay, so National Merchants is a client of ours with various automation and ultimately ETL needs. One of the internal projects that we've adopted from them, they used to maintain a calculator of sorts that sort of fell into disarray and ultimately became a manual process for them again. In an effort to bring back the automation, what we had to do was figure out, why was this becoming a tedious and ultimately it's a routine process for them. So we had to understand why they regressed back into a manual process. And so in the process of doing that, we decided we would build out a step function to both kind of bring results on quickly and understand their problems and kind of explore their data. So along with needing to tackle kind of an unmaintained tech stack and various business process challenges, National Merchants essentially needed a pipeline in which they could ingest transaction data from an ACH process that their acquiring bank would run for them. It would ultimately then need to compare that information that's sitting in one data source against various other data sources backed behind their CRM. And that would determine things like their fees, profit, and ultimately determine the split between NMA and their merchants and clients. This data then has to be transformed and loaded into different tables for legibility and kind of working out the process with them. And then the outputs ultimately needed to get loaded back into their CRM and a final RDS destination where reports could be pulled from and any of the downstream applications could query from. So when ingesting data, because the upstream process of these calculations involved manual input, the data wasn't always the cleanest. At the very top of the function, when ingesting the fees, the first thing that we would actually do is check to see for any payments that had holds. Since these holds actually got set, this is just sort of how they, the organization of the data coming into the system was, these holds would actually get set on child objects in the system. So we'd have to ensure that there was no duplicates in this process. We also at this point had to check to see if any records were unprocessable, because in addition to checking for fee data, we'd have to check for the status on related accounts in their CRM. So if we can't associate fee data with a record in the CRM, we mark it for human review. And you can see here in the step function console, I just have an example for December. You can actually see 2 of their merchants. We couldn't associate one of the records with an ISO company, and another one we couldn't actually associate with a Schedule A, so we couldn't determine pricing for them. And then ultimately, all this can become available in reports at the end of the process. Calculations is a step where we actually run the actual math for the calculator. Pretty straightforward stuff. The transformations here are really just summing and subtracting by a cost, multiplying certain values by rates, and then ultimately outputting totals. While the step didn't involve much in the way of data cleanup or normalization, it does involve further transforming the data. And you'll notice for each of these ingest, calculate, and analysis steps in the function that we have kind of these isolated DB tables, these DynamoDB tables. We did this for 2 reasons. One is we ultimately found that the fee data that we were tracking through this step, through the step function, didn't fit within the event size limit. But the other reason was that if the client had any questions or doubt about the way in which we were extracting, calculating, or transforming the data therein, this gave us a quick view, and you know, we could look back indefinitely on this table and query it programmatically. So here's just an example of one of the steps and kind of the output. This is a calculation record. This record kind of most closely represents a row in the table, in the output table, but with it carries kind of some of those fields that would help with traceability in the step function. So not necessarily things that were ultimately used in calculation, but would kind of you know, indicate where it came from and build trust with any technicals that we're looking at the step function. Last steps are ultimately to run analysis of the data, which again really is more of a legibility thing. And then we have to make our final transformation to post everything into an RDS for use with all the downstream applications and reports. Now, while the current pipeline needs didn't really, we determined that it didn't really merit using a tool like Glue for our current engagement, but I do see next steps with our clients. And if their needs kind of turn into, well, what I see is ultimately they may need to handle real-time payments. So they're going to have a higher frequency coming through their pipeline. And we're also expecting them to grow their client base. So there may be the combination of higher frequency and higher volume. So we've explored what it might look like to replace our step function with Glue. Ultimately, though, this project was a really awesome exercise in determining the ETL needs for a client using AWS tools. And then it was really gratifying ultimately building out a pipeline that had good legibility and felt like it built confidence with the client. Anyways, I'll hand it over now. I think we'll discuss POC funding. I'll give up screen. Thank you.
That's my cue. Nathan, do you have the presentation? Perfect. So POC stands for proof of concept. And it's important that everybody know that this funding tool exists and is being provided by AWS. So actually really exciting. First of all, what is a POC from the AWS perspective? So it's a small scale project for customers who are looking to explore new AWS workloads. That can be in ETL transformation. It can be in machine learning, AI, really any sort of workload that you would perform on AWS. As long as this is a new workload, that's something that can be funded by POC. So the expectation on the other side is that the customer will commit to using AWS if the POC is successful, but that's not actually required to unlock the funding. The core piece is really working with an eligible partner. So you would work with an eligible partner, a consulting partner like Metaltoad to unlock that, which really involves the creation of a cost calculator. And the way that the funding works is you look at the projected overall annual spend for the potential workload, and then working backwards from that annual spend, you take 10% of that, and that is a check literally written by AWS to fund that proof of concept or that POC. There are a few restrictions, and the primary one being the size of the annual recurring revenue. So if there was a project that would result in $250,000 worth of annual recurring revenue, that would be a check for $25,000. If the project involved actually goes over that, that doesn't mean that's the end of the story. The checks that are written typically are even more generous on the AWS side once you identify a larger project. One of the things we've also seen is that the funding for anything that is a $10,000 POC is generally easy to get across the finish line, but we have experience in doing both the small and the larger POCs. There's credits issued up front. It takes a few weeks of pre-approval. So there is some planning and processing, but definitely well worth it if you are considering having a workload. Even thinking about landing it in AWS, it can be very, very helpful. That's it from POC funding. So I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A section. That is, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you can find open answered questions. If we don't have any, perhaps there are some questions, either Nathan or David, that you would have of our AWS representative, or maybe the other way. No questions? It was very thoroughly explained, I admit.
I know, a bit on the spot for questions. I don't have any currently.
Well, okay, so I have a question for actually for all three of you. The ETL with Glue, very clearly understood. We did a poll with the group here, and it was either the distribution was either people had used an ETL, but they had only used Glue, but the other group hadn't before. So I suppose the question would be, have you ever used an ETL that was not Glue? And maybe we could start with Nathan. Have you had experience with ETL outside of Glue?
Yes, we've done a lot of step functions here, either with batch jobs or Lambdas. I've used other traditional scripting mechanisms to perform ETL. I've used other third-party SaaS solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, I find either doing it with code or something like Glue is better than a SaaS drag and drop.
Mm-hmm.
So those have been my experiences so far.
Cool. How about you?
Probably similar experiences to Nathan. We've done a lot of ETL and step functions and state machines. In the past, I've used Spark, but it's nothing that I think I've used at Metaltoad. And I don't think I've used Glue yet on any projects here.
Interesting.
But yeah, lots of step functions for sure.
Yika, how about you?
I have actually used Glue a lot. Even for my interactions with a ton of customers, Glue is like preferred just because it takes away the heavy lifting.
Mhm.
But I have worked with EMR as well in my time here, which is whole other thing, I guess, if you need a lot more than Spark, which I think is able to cater to majority of the use cases. If you want to go a little bit beyond that, then EMR is another service to explore.
Interesting. What's sort of the threshold where you would say it would be one or the other?
I mean, it depends on the kind of project as well as the preference
Mhm.
that the customers have, the familiarity that they have, if they're specifically looking for Hadoop or like Trino or something along those lines.
Mhm.
You can use Elastic, like you can use EMR for those use cases. And if you have multiple use cases, like you are using all of those, in those cases, EMR can also be helpful. But most of the time, I see that if there are Spark use cases, or if ETLs can be done through that, people rely on Glue a lot. It just makes it really easy from a maintenance perspective, as well as building pipelines.
And
Glue
then
is much easier to understand than EMR. Much
Yeah.
easier to understand.
I mean, again, I have used both, and I feel like since I am from AWS, for me, it's a little bit tad easier to get comfortable with the services.
And then as far as a sort of an open question for any of the three of you, when doing the architecture, as far as figuring out what the actual transformation is going to look like, what are some best practices? Is this like whiteboarding? Is it like Miro boarding? How do you typically figure out what sort of data transformations, or how you're going to apply it? Maybe you work within a GUI. What are the systems that you use to approach that?
So I can even speak to the case that we had today. We've done a ton of Miro boarding with the client back and forth. Ultimately, the step function, though, is really powerful because we were able to kind of take what we did in the Miro board and through the step function, make it live and active. So the step function played a huge role in us being able to kind of explore the data with the client. And with it, like I said, we kind of get results too. Like we get a usable system by building out the step function, but it was as much as a usable system as it was a platform for us to kind of explore the data and what their ETL needs were.
Yep, the
Any
other
other
thing I've used
thoughts?
here is a data dictionary where we pull up essentially a spreadsheet and you list out either all the things you want to get or all the things you have and what their data types are and where they're located. And you just work across either direction. So you can find where all your data is coming from and what types they are, go the other direction. And that'll inform the type of ETLs and systems you'll have to connect to.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what Nathan said. I basically just sit down with a set of questions, and I feel the more conversations you have, the more questions you have, and then you ultimately end up asking what is the result they want, how they want, and again, a target also depends on their requirements. Multiple factors to take into consideration, including cost, performance, what exactly they are okay with, and go from there.
Right. Another question that just sprung to mind in terms of the key stakeholders for a data transformation project. Is it really technical? Is it technical plus like business stakeholders? Is it sort of the front end developers are asking for certain transformations? What's a typical group of stakeholders, and or maybe some groups that we wouldn't expect? Obviously, you expect technical people to have some opinions on it, but maybe what are some non-technical groups that you think would really benefit from being part of a planning session or being involved or queried in one way or the other?
End users of data are always nice to consult with, especially when you're doing an ETL behind the scenes, because they may be used to getting data presented in a certain way, and making sure it's still presented in a usable way for them is important. Even if their front end GUI isn't changing, simply, providing decimal points versus not providing decimal points can completely change what someone sees.
Right.
Yeah, same. I feel like having business user at least be part of some of the conversation helps in understanding what they are looking for as well, and how easy it will be for them to interact with the end results. I think that input does matter. Technical folks can, of course, help in like building it out, providing the technicalities or what's needed in terms of source and target. But business folks is what you're ultimately targeting and getting the results to.
David, any thoughts on stakeholders?
No, pretty similar. I mean, the case of like the use case for NMA, it would be the project would not be doable without the business input from their team. I think for say like ML projects, that can kind of change. That ends up being a conversation between like the data engineers and the ML engineers in terms of what the requirements are there for ETL. But yeah, no, it's very much been my experience too. The stakeholders, the business stakeholders, definitely need to be a part of the conversation.
Great. And so we're over time. Thank you so much for the time check, Nathan. Thank you all for attending.